Well, I know today you're going to hold a news conference and you're going to talk about these crime numbers out of Milwaukee. What concerns do you have about them? You think somebody's been fudging the numbers?
I don't know, but I do think it's clear the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel's investigative team pointed out at least 500 cases where they were miscalculated, and just on those cases alone, instead of violent crime going down, it would have gone up by more than 1%. There's 800 more cases like that, and it could be a considerable swing. It seems pretty clear talking to the rank and file, to the Milwaukee Police Association and others, that they don't believe it's the actual officers, that it's somewhere further down the process. And I think that's why there needs to be an independent audit of this, and not through the Fire and Police Commission. That's a commission that's appointed by the mayor of Milwaukee. And I think for a lot of people there's great concern because the mayor has been touting these numbers as an example of his leadership. The facts now clearly show that violent crime has gone up. That's important to know, not because we wish it. I live 4 blocks from the Milwaukee Police Association, so for me, for my family, for my kids in particular, I don't want violent crime going up anywhere in the range of the city of Milwaukee. I want it to go down. But I think the only way you can address that issue is if you have the real facts so that you can take action on it.
So who should take action? Are you going to do anything in asking the state to get involved? Do you want J.B. Van Hollen to get involved?
Well, I think a number of things. I use a number of members of the Common Council have asked the Comptroller's Office. I think that makes sense. But I also certainly agree with Senator Alberta Darling. A legitimate spot at the state level is through the Nonpartisan Legislative Audit Bureau. They're very well respected by Democrats and Republicans alike. I think they should look at this process and ultimately not just leave it up to the city of Milwaukee to determine what happened here, but to make sure that there's an independent review and audit of that so that things can be fixed. There's been a number of concerns the last couple of years from the rank and file police officers in the city of Milwaukee that not enough has been done to support them, to staff up to appropriate levels. And I think this is another basis upon which they base their concern.
Do you think the mayor needs to do some explaining about it as well, or is this a police department issue?
No, I think this is one of those where, again, this is unlike, for example, county officials are different than the sheriff's office who's independently elected. The city of Milwaukee, the police department falls under the purview, just as the fire department does, under the mayor and the city council. And I think in moments like this, not only does the mayor need to take leadership to correct this, but I think it does raise a serious question. If one of the big arguments the mayor has been using to people across the state is that he's a successful leader because of things like the violent crime rate going down, if that's been a legitimate argument before, now that we know that at least it's going up by more than 1% and maybe more, I think it's a legitimate question for voters to ask, now that they have that piece of information, if indeed he is providing the kind of leadership needed there. I pointed out for some time when it comes to jobs, when it comes to taxes and fees, that he's failed the citizens of the city of Milwaukee. And I think this is another example where he has to stand and be accountable for it.
He might be saying you're playing politics with this, you're just trying to change the subject.
No, in our case, the subject's been, in fact, he's actually complained about. The very subject he's talked about is us focusing on the city of Milwaukee. We're not changing the subject at all. We're talking about exactly the same thing he's talked about this week. The difference is he tries to twist the subject. When I've said before, we don't want the state of Wisconsin to become like Milwaukee. He takes that out of context and just attributes that as though somehow that's disparaging Milwaukee. We're not. I love Milwaukee. I love the people of Milwaukee. I live blocks from the city of Milwaukee. I care deeply about making sure the city is not only safe, but its citizens are productive and there's prosperity for all the people of the city of Milwaukee, just like the rest of the state of Wisconsin. What I've consistently said is we don't want Wisconsin to become like the city of Milwaukee. We want Milwaukee and other cities that are in distress to become more like the positive things we've seen across the state. And that's really the difference. I care about Milwaukee just like I care about Manitowoc and Marathon City and places all across the state.
When you look at the jobs and what's going on the jobs front, a lot of dispute of whether the numbers are right or not. 30,000 is the number you're using right now. You say the reforms are working, especially when you look at the property taxes. When it comes to creating jobs, specifically, tax cuts you put in place, did they directly result in job creation?
I believe so. I believe there's manufacturers like Marvel Manufacturing I was at yesterday in Oshkosh who added added jobs this past year. I had another company up in the Chippewa Falls that added 35 jobs last year, 20 more this year. They're just installing next week about $1 million piece of equipment. In manufacturing, to put people to work, you've got to make significant financial investments in capital. New pieces of equipment, new products out there. That only happens if you've got the ability to make that capital investment. And overwhelmingly for small and mid-sized manufacturers, our manufacturing tax credit has already, even without being fully engaged, has already sent a strong message to those employers that they can make those investments, they can start hiring again. And that's in direct contrast to the mayor, who, at least throughout the primary, he's kind of changed his tune since the primary, but throughout the primary, he kind of put it all in the same context. What he called were tax breaks for businesses out there, and said he was going to repeal them, or at least suggested that. Well, this is what they do. They provide relief for manufacturers who buy equipment, buy new pieces of machinery, and put people to work, and I think that's an admirable goal, and I think you're going to see even more of it in the future.
If you win June 5th, you need to do more, though, to change the business climate in terms of incentives with tax cuts or other changes to policy to create more jobs.
I think first and foremost, the best thing we can do to get the state working again is win on June 5th. We've changed the climate, whereas 2 years ago, just 10% of our employers thought we were heading in the right direction. Now 94% of our employers in the state think we're heading in the right direction. But on survey after survey and report after report, the biggest single concern out of those employers across the state is the recall. They believe we're moving forward. They believe there's been a dynamic change. It's why we went from the bottom 10 in rankings of states into the top 20, because ultimately employers here and across the country see that we've done things to make it easier to create jobs. What they're scared about is that somehow things would change after June 5th. They can see how we were in the past. They don't want to go backwards. They can see how things are in the city of Milwaukee. They don't want to go backwards. That alone, I think, will be a tremendous change. I think you're going to see like a rocket ship, a takeoff in terms of small business and putting people to work. But I do think there's more. I think we can, certainly I hear, particularly in manufacturing, from employers who say, I have jobs, but I don't have enough skilled workers. That's why we brought Tim Sullivan in, the former CEO of Bucyrus, to help us out to try and redirect our resources, redeploy in a way that focuses in on machining and welding and fabricating and other key areas where there's needs, where we can put people to work. We just don't have enough people with the skill sets. It's certainly why I've been working with Dr. Tony Evers, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, to improve what we do in our K through 12 system when it comes not only to reading, but to educator effectiveness and school district accountability, to make sure we've got a pipeline of workers ready to go for the future. And it means in the future looking at things like the tax burden, particularly the individual income tax, which obviously for all of us, you and me and everybody else who pays taxes, would be great. But what most people in government don't understand is the vast majority of small businesses don't pay corporate taxes. They pay individual income taxes. And to the extent that we can get that under control, that allows those small businesses to have more money in hand to go out and hire more people.
You say under control, so 2013 you propose cuts in personal income?
I think we're going to look at a way of doing that in the budget. We don't have a specific number in target, but you look at my predecessor, one of the things he did was raise taxes on individuals, which affected small businesses, as well as raising taxes on businesses overall 20%. During that same time frame, Wisconsin lost about 100,000 jobs, and the unemployment rate was over 9%. We want to go the other direction. We want to move forward. Unemployment's down below 7% for the first time since 2008. We want to continue down that path.
Should unions worry if you're re-elected, you win the recall? Yeah. Should they worry like...
Elected again, I guess is the right way to say it.
Yeah. If you win the recall, look out. He's going to feel like he's got all this power now to go after even more to get to the union.
Our goal when I ran in 2010 was to help the people, not the government, but the people of Wisconsin create 250,000 jobs. We've went from losing 100,000 jobs before I came in to gaining more than 30,000 jobs now that I've been in office. But we still got a long ways to go to get to 250,000. What I have clearly shown over the past year and a half is that private sector unions are my partner in economic development. They've worked with me on advancing improvements in infrastructure for transportation. They stood with me when it came to the mining legislation, which we hope to pursue and continue down that path to streamline the process for safe and environmentally sound mining. They stood with me as we broke ground for new power plants around the state. I think if you're in a skilled trade, you're in a union, you understand and you've seen clearly, more than just in words, but in actions and deeds, that those unions are my partners in economic development. I have no interest in going back and rehashing the same debate we've had over the last year and a half. The only candidate, ironically, in this race who wants to do that is the mayor of Milwaukee.
But if you're facing budget problems again in 2013, right now your administration is suggesting there's a surplus. Mm-hmm. The Fiscal Bureau, not quite sure there yet if there is a surplus. But if you're faced with more money, what are you going to do with the additional funds? If you're faced with fewer dollars, do you go back and ask the unions to contribute more?
Oh, I think we're going to continue to look at reforms. I mean, part of the success we've seen as to why we have a surplus now is that our reforms are working. Part of the reason why we knew the new job numbers would be positive and not negative when you saw an actual sample, nearly just about every employer in the state versus a sample of 3.5%. The reason we knew those numbers were going to be good was our Department of Revenue for months has been scratching their head saying unemployment rate is down, unemployment benefit claims are down, and revenues, particularly revenues generated from personal income increases, are up. So you don't need to be an economist to see if revenues are up and unemployment is down, that means there's more jobs. If we continue down the path, if we continue to build this positive foundation for success that has helped us move this state forward and already seen the private sector create more jobs, I firmly believe in the next biennium you're going to see tremendous revenue growth. It's going to help us balance the budget. We put in place reforms in Medicaid even while adding more money to Medicaid than any governor in Wisconsin history to support things like Badger Care and family care. But I think those reforms will also make that program sustainable, which is the fastest growing part of our state budget. And it'll allow us to make targeted investments in education and higher education in the future, as well as reducing the tax burden on small businesses and individuals.
Do you think you've been upfront with the voters on the John Doe investigation?
Yeah. I mean, I've talked about this probably more than any politician in Wisconsin history. But as the mayor and others who are lawyers know, when you're cooperating with something like this, you got to follow the rules. John Chisholm asked us to cooperate with him. We have. We've been in a position to do that. But remember, I'm the one through my office back several years ago that asked Mr. Chisholm to look into this in the first place. We saw something that was wrong. We asked his office to look into it. We've continued to be in a position to cooperate with him. But there are certain rules and requirements as part of that process. I think the most important thing for people to remember is look at my record in the legislature. Look at my record in the state as the county executive. Look at my record now as the governor. I've always had a high level of integrity. I've always had a very clear and strict policy against using taxpayers' resources for political and campaign purposes. And even the facts that have come out beyond just my control over the last 6 months or so clearly show that any time that was brought to my attention that someone violated that policy, I took swift action to correct it.
Do you think voters are entitled to know, if you have met with the DA, voters are entitled to know what's in those emails? Why did you set up a legal defense fund? Do you think they're entitled to know the answers to those questions?
Well, I think, again, I think more than anything, I take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of this state. Part of that oath is not just in my job as the governor. Part of my oath is following all the laws, not just selectively picking the ones I like and the ones I don't. In this case, I'm obligated to follow the laws in terms of what Mr. Chisholm and the others have asked us to do and when to say things. So for us to be able to continue to cooperate, I can't violate those rules or that legal requirement.
You feel like it's this dark cloud hanging over you?
Well, not a dark cloud. I just feel like it's, excuse me, I just feel like more than anything, it's like, when I talk about a topic like this, it's like fighting a fight with both hands tied behind your back. Because there are a lot of things I love to say, but I don't want to violate the terms of being able to cooperate with him and his team. And so, again, I'm not going to do that. It'd be a lot easier to come out and say, here's exactly what's going on. All I can say is I think people have seen my integrity, certainly in the legislature, certainly as county executive, and I hope they see it each and every day. You may not agree with everything I say or do, but I think most people hopefully would agree. I'm a straight shooter, and I'll tell people when something's wrong, and I'll say what I'm going to do to fix it. In this case, I maintain a high level of integrity, and I think you'll see at the very end, once this is all completed and finished, that my integrity will still be fully intact.
June 5th, historic election. 2 governors have lost historic elections, these recalls. They're 0 for 2. Are you at peace with whatever